Hello everybody and welcome to another video. This week we're going to be looking at Ghazghull, King of the Orcs, and we're going to be painting up like Lurtz from the Lord of the Rings. Let's get stuck in. Now I know his title isn't actually King of the Orcs, it's something else. I don't know much about orcs, but I know he's the big un. And you always aim for the big un, so the big un's gotta be tough. We're also doing Magragge. So the brief on this one was to make him look like Lurtz, the lead Uruk-Hai from the Fellowship of the Ring, the first movie in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Now while I don't know much about Ghazghull, I do know a little bit about Lurtz, so I knew kind of what direction we were going in. The only other points that were mentioned is that he wanted him heavily battle damaged, and we had to add some blue in there because they've been fighting the Ultramarines and nicking all their stuff. So I added a couple of blue panels on both Ghaz and Magragge, and then broke out my trusty Rhinox hide, brown paint, and a sponge, and started adding the first layer of chipping. Uruk-Hai armour from the Lord of the Rings is black, so I kept Ghaz's black here, which made it a super simple base coat of just the black primer from a rattle can. I followed up my layers of Rhinox hide sponging with some Basalt Grey from AK. I then followed that up with some metallics, in this case dark aluminium from Vallejo. I should probably just start saying, the standard metallic paint, and those who know. There is some more chipping we're going to do later, but for now we're going to move on to some rust effects. Another part of the brief was to make sure he's heavily rusted, so I used some enamel paints, once again from AK, to create some nice streaks and pools of this medium level rust. If you want to recreate this without using enamel paints, you can just use a brighter orange from Citadel or any other brand. One I'd recommend is Lugganoth orange for those really bright rust effects, and if you haven't got that, maybe go for something like Fire Dragon Bright or Trollslayer orange. So with the initial layers of battle damage complete, we're going to move on to the metallics. Using that same Vallejo dark aluminium, we're going to base coat all those silver areas, so the big power claw, piping, cables, those weird bolt-on teeth he's got. Really easy to do. I'm also going to use some Runelord brass to break up a few of those metallic areas, specifically looking at things like pistons, ammo belts, anything like that. Then moving on to all the tassels, we're going to use a nice bright red. In this case, Khorne Red, just to really add another primary colour into the mix and make sure he's not all just black and beaten up. I think red's a nice addition. It's maybe not completely accurate to like the Lord of the Rings reference, but in terms of orcs in 40k, they're wearing whatever they can find. They don't really care. Now moving on to the skin, I used a base coat of Rhinox hide and then mixed that with a few greys to try and build up throughout the process. If you look at the references from the movie, Lurtz has quite dark skin, not something you'd necessarily normally see on a Warhammer 40k orc, so I found this quite interesting to do. For reference, the grey I was using was German grey, and generally I started with more Rhinox hide, adding in more and more German grey as I approached those highlights. I'm using Magragge as the main reference here because he's got that nice open back so you can paint his shoulder blades really easily. Ghaz's face is a bit hidden behind that massive iron jaw. There is one more major feature to the skin that we're going to come back to, but for the time being, whilst that dried, I moved on to all the bone and horn areas. I'm painting those in Steel Legion Drab, and then to add a bit more colour to the model, I'm painting all of the pipes in a nice bright purple. In this case, Hex Lichen from Vallejo. Then again, looking to make an economy of effort whilst those things dry, I'm moving on to highlighting all those red parts, using Evil Sunz Scarlet from Citadel. Once those were done, I decided to paint his tongue in a nice dark grey colour and leave it at that. If you look at the tongues of the orcs in Lord of the Rings, they're like all kinds of horrible colours, so I just went for a grey here. Then going back to one of my metallic paints, Runelord Brass, I added in all the copper cabling inside of these giant cables on his back. Then back to the horns, highlighting first with Zandri dust and then with Ushabti bones slightly later to give a nice brighter effect towards the points. I also base coated the grip of the standard that Magragge is holding in Barak-Nar Burgundy, again just for a little bit of a difference in colour. Then back to Ghaz, it's onto one of the fun parts of painting this model, other than all the chipping and damage I mean, because that's great fun, but adding the white hand of Saruman over his eye. I did this by creating the impression of 4 fingers and a thumb over on his forehead and eyebrow ridge, and then a bit of a palm below his eye near the cheek. In the movies, this is applied very haphazardly. The orc who's applying it dips his hand into some kind of white paste or powder, can't quite remember, and slaps it on the Uruk-Hai's face. So that's basically what they did to Ghaz, though I'm assuming Ghaz then beat the hell out of the person who did that to him. With that haphazard application in mind, I didn't need to be too neat with this, but I still tried to make sure it looked like a hand. After that was done, I applied Nuln Oil to all of the metallic areas. Back to Magragge for a second, we're going to highlight up his banner pole grip with some Screamer Pink. Now back to the horns, we're going to add some Seraphim Sepia to darken down the bases. This case I'm just sweeping it towards the base, no real glazing required, but it will mean that the colour is darker towards the base where the horns are going into the armour. Once those were done, I went back to the cables and added some Genestealer purple to the higher areas of the cable. If you'd like a full paint list for this scheme, everything is available in the description below. Now I said we weren't done with battle damage. After speaking to the customer, he said, can we make him even more dirty and beaten up? And I said, say no more. So, breaking out my Mournfang brown, I created a lovely chipped patina effect all over the armour. All those areas that were still kind of exposed, they're now covered in this. I think this was actually a really good addition and added loads more depth to the model. I'm not sure what it is about this paint, but mixing in with everything else we had and also being able to apply it to all the metallics really helped sell the effect. The final thing I did was add one more layer of a brighter silver, in this case silver, from Vallejo, and it really completed the entire chipped effect, and I'm really pleased with it. So great shout on the customer's part, it really helped sell the model. A few final touches before we complete and move on to the base. I'm adding some Agaros dunes and then some Wyldwood in some streaky areas all over the armour. You can't see these amazingly well, but it gives a little bit of gloss to the entire model in those areas that I've applied it, and if you look closely you can definitely see it. Subtlety is always a good thing when you're doing something over the top like this, so if you do look closely you can see layers upon layers of chipping and paint and colours, like you would in real life. Final things to do with washes is to add some muzzle burn to the top of the exhaust and his gun using some Druchii Violet and then some Drakenhof Nightshade. Now quickly cantering through the base, I used some Vallejo thick mud and stabbed it all over Ghaz's and Magragge's base with a big brush. As mentioned in the brief, we wanted some ultramarine stuff over these models, so as well as the plates we added some helmets to the bottom of the base, and I painted those up very quickly off camera. The final step for the base, before tidying everything up, was to add some Abteilung 502's Vietnam Earth pigments all over, and then also all over Ghaz's feet once he was glued on. A quick tidy up of the bases later and the models are complete. This was a really good time and hopefully quite simple to replicate if you're interested in doing it yourself. As always, I've been Sam. See you next time.